Hello and welcome back. Today I'm painting a coastal scene which has got the benefit of having a lovely lake and a cottage. I want to put some clouds in, but I wanted the day marker to show up. So I'm just going to put some water on the page, which will give the paint a lost edge. And this, from this particular angle, there's no horizon showing against the sea because it's lost behind the cliffs. And then some more paint on the right, which I'll again just put some water there to diffuse the paint, to making the sky nice and loose, because there's lots of detail in the other areas of the picture, so it would be nice just to have as a foil. Now the next thing I'm going to put in are the roofs of the houses, because I want to set the tones, and they are slate. So I'm going to use a homemade grey. All the colours are in the description, plus details of the location. I want to warm up the slate a little bit, so I'm just adding a tiny bit of Naples yellow. I'm doing most of it so far with a bigger brush, but I will go into a smaller brush quite soon. I've got a darker area of the roof where there's chimneys, but I'll just put the same colour in for now and then come back to it. And there's lots of little sheds and things. And then I've got a wall, so I'm going to just adapt the grey to do the wall because it's in semi-shade. So I'm just going to add some light red or Venetian red or any red you've got, just to warm up a neutral colour. You don't want it to be dominant, you just want it to be barely visible. So whilst I'm waiting for that, I'll put the lawn in. So I'm using sap green and chrome yellow, but any bright green will do. Just makes it look different to the fields behind. And I want some of the paint going different directions to add to the detail of the picture. So I'm doing the grass sideways because the cliffs are going up and down, so it's a good contrast to have some of the brush strokes going the other way. And then there's a delightful little sluice of where the lake water goes down onto the beach. And then this side it's in shade, but I'm going to start with the same colour for continuity and then add a second coat. So now I need to put in the foreground, which is rough scrub. So I need to make clumps. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue to the green mix I had a minute ago. Make it darker because it's in shade. Just add a little bit of yellow ochre to it, and because it's not a lawn, I'm going to do the brush strokes up and down to show that it's a rough scrub. And changing colour, putting some blue in just so it doesn't look like a lawn, and then when it's dry I can put some more bushes on. Now I'm going to put the beach in next. It's low tide. I'm using Naples yellow for the beach, but there will be some seaweed to go on top, so I'll just make a line of Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, light yellow ochre will do. And the top of the beach is covered in seaweed, so it's a slightly different colour, so I'm just going to add a little bit of the colour I use for the wall, so I've got continuity in the picture. The second beach is just visible below the day marker, and then a tiny bit of Cove just in front of it. Making the one that's slightly more forward brighter. I've just darkened that one by adding a little bit of purple. So the next stage is to look at the hillside, which has got some areas that have been planted with trees and other areas that are just grazing. So I'm going to put the grazing pasture in before the trees. And it's not flat, it's sort of raised in the middle. So I'm starting with a mixture of the sky colour that was left and adding lots of Naples yellow. And I'm going to do sideways strokes. And just catch the area that's showing the sun. And then I'll change colours. I can do that a little bit further down. And then each side of it is a little bit darker. So I'll add some sap green to it. Still sideways strokes. And there's more trees around the edge. So I'm just merging the colours in so there's not a definite edge. Moving on to the rocks on the beach, as the picture's in a valley, it's important to tackle areas that are going to show that it's a valley and not a flat surface. And then on the beach there's lots of seaweed that's dried, and that's a different colour, so I'm using a little bit of Venetian red for that. If you haven't got Venetian red, if you just mix some orange, any orange will do, with a brown, and it'll just give a different colour because it separates it from the rocks nicely. And just use water to feather down the edge. And there's also the other side of the water going down onto the foreshore, so I'll just put that in, leave a gap. The lake is a very important feature to the picture, and it's got a man-made edge, so I'm going to again use the rock colour and just go round and just put a dark line in. And then where it's catching the sun, the man-made edge is slightly warmer further up, so I'm just going to use yellow ochre. Just put in a little line which will separate it from the water, which I'll put in shortly. Now the cliffs actually are not brown, they're quite light, so I'm going to use homemade grey to start with. I'm using a small brush and just putting in a few contours. So I'll start above the sand that I put in earlier, just put some paint down and then move the paint, and that will give a nice light finish. And there's a lot of growth coming down. And then there's a second lot of cliffs that are catching the sun. So I'll just put some dark in, and then I'll add some Naples yellow in between. And just get water and merge them gently together. We only want the suggestion of the wall. And then there's some sea defences that are more grey, made of a different material. I suspect it's concrete. I'll just add those. You have to add these things in stages because otherwise the brown rocks would have bled into them. So that's given some idea of a walkway now. And there's some grass that's visible behind. So I'll just slip that in. But it's quite dappled because the autumn leaves have fallen on it. When you're painting leaves in autumn, you do have to put them on the ground as well. So now going to a slightly bigger brush, from bottom to top going up, the idea of some trees. Leaving a few gaps because there are walkways under them. and there's also some that are evergreens. So I'll just put some rectangular streaks in and then I can amend them. So now I'm going to go to just water and lose some of the edges. There's some quite historic trees here. Got a cedar tree above the white hut, so I'm just going to put in a curve and then bring it down a little bit to some other trees, and then get the water and just pour the paint down, and then I can add more foliage in a minute, but I've got the shape of the very old trees. So coming forward, I've got a conifer above the point of this building. So this time I'll go from the bottom to the top, just showing the shape of the tree. Now taking the older trees up a level further into the field. Then I've got an area that's very dark, that's in shade. So I want to put that in just a sort of a dark alleyway through the trees. And I'm now going to just get the water, a little bit of orangey paint, which will lighten it, pull it out a bit. Then I'll add some yellow from the other side, which will pull it out a bit and leave me the dark line. I'm just going to get the brush and just lose some of the far edges and put the hedge in. And I've got the division between the trees and the cottage garden. The very light foliage on the cliff tops, which is changing with autumn colour. So I'll just put the strokes going down. So always try and paint things the way they grow. And that's changing quite a lot with autumn colours and catching the afternoon sun. So I'll just put some colours in and then I can tint it in a minute. But I've got the shape of the cliff. And then going further up, slightly darker. And just joining the field. They're probably darker because they're in their own shadow. And then coming to the front again, the same colour as the first lot. Even though they're further away, they are the same colour. So I'll take the lighter colour into the darker one and just push it back. And then add a little bit more orangey colour. I'm just dropping chrome orange into the original paint. And that goes all the way down to the edge of the cliffs. So I'll just put strokes showing that it's going down to the water level. But I can move forward to the house again where there's some dark trees in shadow, which will help show the lighter roofs. So just dropping the dark colour in around the area of the roof and then taking it, avoiding the chimney, up a bit. So I'll just use some water and lose the edge of that again. I can move on to the lake. It's got a lot of reflections, but a lot of it is the sky colour. So I'm going to make up a warmer blue. Reflections are often warmer or darker. So I'm adding some cobalt turquoise to the French ultramarine. And now the edge is dried, I'm just going to drop it in. A little bit more turquoise. And there's no disturbance to the reflection at all. It is one solid area, so I need to do it while it's all wet, not leave any definite brush strokes. And I can put any dark reflections on top. And then I'm not going anywhere near the house because I want that to have clean colours, but the green on top of the blue won't matter. using a small brush, just going behind the sand, taking the brush for a walk. There's lots of different rocks here, and they're all ribbons of rocks. And I go back into the hillside. And then I can go over it afterwards with a slightly lighter colour, perhaps some grey or yellow ochre, but just to show that it is very, very uneven. Just put in the ribbons of colour. Just tinting it with a little bit of Payne's grey for a change. Any darker colour will do. It's just a question of showing that it's got shadows. And there's a big area here that's darker. And then some of the rocks actually go out into the sea. Obviously very good for rock pooling here. Same method, just keep the brush moving as much as possible. And then some of the rocks go back into the cliff. And they go behind the promontory. So first of all, I've just got to go up to the bottom of the promontory that's sticking out. And take some of the rock back. It's obviously got hard and soft rock, so some of it's stayed and others bits have been eroded. So it's got a different pattern at the bottom of the area because it's sort of been subject to the waves. So I'll put some homemade grey in that while it's still a bit damp so I don't get such strong lines. And then it's very dark the other side of it again. So I'll try some yellow ochre on top just to give a contrast, just make it quite watery, just so it's getting rid of the white paper. If you're putting a second coat on top like this where the gaps are, you just need to be quite precise. Don't keep raking it around, just do a brush stroke or two and move on. Keep moving all the time and just go along, make it a little bit more definite. And then using some of the colour I use for the seaweed, browny colour, just lip it up to the top there to show there's something growing. Moving up to the skyline, I'm just putting a shadow underneath the trees to show the difference between the autumn foliage and the field. And then use a slightly bigger brush, mix in some orange into the green so that it's got an autumnal hint, and just follow the line of the trees so it's going up from the field, just making curved brush strokes. And I've mixed a different colour because it's so much further away that the colours change with distance. And there's a much darker tree on the horizon, so I'll just use some dark colour there. And there's a few of them, so just put a few lines in, clean the brush off and go back to the original colour. And just let the colours bleed into each other. It's quite good doing trees at this distance, wet into wet, and they find their own way. And then there's some that are slightly lighter on the other side of the beacon. So I'll just put those in. And they've got, because of the way the sun's going, they've got a dark line on the far side. So I'll just drop that in, make it a bit more definite. And there's a couple of areas that are quite distinctive where there's a change in the height of the trees that's giving a shadow. Again, going in with a lighter colour. I'm going to vary it this time. I'm going to add some chrome yellow so the picture's got different colours throughout. So I'm just dropping the colour in, back to the dark area, loading the brush again, and then just doing a little wet into wet. And I need a little bit more variety, so I'll go back with a tiny bit of orange. Just drop it in. I need to make the trees stand out above the hillside, so I need to try and get some height in there, which I can do again with some dark. Just blend a little bit in and put a few curves to show the height of the trees, so it doesn't look like shrubs. And then add some lighter colour again. And I've got a few bits of white paper showing, so I'm just going to drop some yellow on top of those, which will send the other colours back and again indicate perhaps higher spots. All you can do is play warm against cold when you're doing this. And I've still got some yellow on the brush, so I'll go back over this side, which is also catching the sun from the same angle, and just drop some in. Now I need to go back to the foliage on top of the cliffs and just make it a little bit bolder. So I'm using the paint that's on the palette that I've just used for the trees, just gently going over the same area again. I've got a hedge running through the trees and the fields, so I'm using the very dark green again because it's got a lot of shadow, and just putting in a little wiggly line, which helps show the distance and the field areas. Every now and again there's a tree, and then some areas are quite wooded. It might be a windbreak for the house, you don't know. This is much thicker line, so I'll change colours, mix it all together to get a different colour, and then just go back and fill the gap. Let's go again to make it more definite, and make this a little bit stronger as well. First of all, you claim the space, and then you can strengthen things. So the next stage now is to put in the water so that I can get the colour tones. And the water is quite shallow, there's sand underneath, so it's not actually a very clear colour. I'm going to add a little bit of Viridian to the French ultramarine, and then a tiny bit on the brush of the homemade grey, just to knock it back a bit. And I've got trees going over it and a few rocks, so I'm just doing sideways strokes. And it comes all the way into the beach. And the beach is quite wet because there's a stream going down that enters here. So I'm just going to use a little bit of paint on the brush, and then get some water and just merge the colours. Because I'm effectively painting a valley, you've got to have some scale in it, so the hedges actually work very well. And there's another hedge there. So now I can put in the different coloured fields. And I've got one that's bright green, that's obviously pasture. So I'll just add some yellow to the green mix I've already used to give the picture harmony. And you can see it through the trees and bringing the richer green forward. And then I've got one that's been ploughed. So I'm just going to go over that with some brown. Any brown will do, but I'm just making it a bluey brown. I don't want it the same as the rocks. I want it to look warmer and drier, so I'm going to use more Venetian red. It's important to have the sea colours and the land colours different so that you can see that one's warmer than the other. I can put the reflection in the lake. So the first thing I can see is the chimneys, which I actually haven't put on the house yet. So I'm just going to add a little bit of orange to the Venetian red. You can add orange to any brown to do this. So the chimneys have gone in. While I'm waiting for those, I'll put the shed in, which I'm using burnt sienna for. It's just a traditional wooden shed. And then the next shed's white, so I'll leave that well alone. Now they're not reflected in the lake because they're further back, where the house is further forward and it's taller, so it is reflected. So I'll start with the very dark corner of the roof, which I'm using Payne's grey because it's different to the homemade greys I've used in other areas. If you've only got black, you can add blue to it to make it more of a nondescript colour. And there's a few lost edges here, you can't see everything. Just moving the paint from one area to the other because I don't need much. And then the actual V's themselves are much lighter, so I'm just going to use really scraps from the palette just to make it a lighter grey. And then I've got another chimney and green foliage that's starting to get a hint of autumn. So I'll work out and then work back to the roof so that the colours don't bleed too much. And they get darker in the corner, so I'll change to the dark green paint. And then drop some dark green into the paint that I've just put in, just to merge it. Back to the lighter colour. And there's some very, very dark trees that are further into the lake. And they go all the way down to the chimneys. So just have to keep the brush on the move. Because they're upside down, I'm sort of starting in the middle and then working forward. That's all very dark, and then it changes to slightly lighter, so I'm just going to add some orange to the green and just put in some lighter areas. Just keep changing the paint all the time. Just do a few brush strokes and remix. Adding some more blue. Just taking the paint along as I go. Then I've got a bush coming from this side, so I'm just going to add the autumn colours just in a little bit. Take some to that area. Doesn't need to show much because it's darker in the reflection and it's a different angle. What the sun's catching, the water isn't. But the water can be seen through, so I'm just putting in some branches. And then adding a little bit of yellow ochre to the mix, and then just doing sideways strokes for foliage. Not everything turns to autumn colours at the same time. And that does actually go over the grass, this one. But you can still see the water through, so just keep the brush dancing. Don't let it stay still. While it's drying, I'll put the front of the cottage in, which is sort of like a grey brick. So I'll go to the homemade grey and add a little bit of Naples yellow just to give it a lift. When you've made a grey, it's very easy to tint it. And just stick the shape of the house in. Because it's upright and I've got lots of squiggly things for trees, I'm doing up and down strokes at the moment. Well, there's a herbaceous border around it, so I'll leave a gap for that. And then the end wall is slightly darker, it's in shade. just using a darker mix. It's the same mix, but just haven't done anything to it. And there's a few extras. It's got a conservatory or a lean-to, so I'll just put in the roof for that, just as a dark box, and then just join things up to it. And we'll give it a dark bottom so that we can see it, and then leave the rest till it's dry. The white shed has got obviously a darker corner because it's in shade, so we can put some slight bluey mix in there just to show it. And then I'm coming back to the trees again behind the house and the drive, so I'll stick the drive in first, just with some grey, and then either side of the drive, they're nice bushes. They're round, or they're quite green, so I'm mixing some yellow with the existing green and just doing swirls to show the bushes. Now the herbaceous borders, they look like hydrangeas, but I'll put them in the same green swirls, and I can always drop a little bit of colour in afterwards. Now going back to the foreshore here, there's some telegraph poles. Obviously isolated properties, got to have electricity, and they are at a jaunty angle. I'm just adding more trees around the house, giving it a chance to dry because I don't want the colours to bleed into each other. So there's some species that haven't changed, which gives it a bit of punch. And then the rest that have gone a nice orange. So I'm going to use the chrome orange again and just mix it with some of the green. I don't want a stark change. It's got to be a gradual change to look authentic. And then having done one line, I can now increase the strength further back. Punctuated with a few dark shadows. So I just put a few dark squiggles in to show its trees. Side of the shed is quite dark, so if that's quite dark, the trees around it have got to be dark because the light will be coming from the same way. So I'm just going to use a smaller brush and put the dark side of the shed in, which I'll use Payne's Grey. And then there's a little bit of cast shadow going back. Shorter shrubs down behind the wall. So I'm just going to add some yellow ochre to that just to make it slightly different. Now moving back to the cedars and other quite good specimen trees that are there. I'm just going to add some sap green to the very dark green that I made earlier, just to show that they are catching whatever sun is available. And they're not solid, you can see the field through them, so leaving some gaps. And there's two crowns, so I use a darker line to show the second crown. And go back to the original colour now that I've separated it. And then coming forward, it's slightly brighter, so just altering the colour fractionally, adding a little bit more yellow to it. Just breaking up that dark line slightly. You can only suggest all these things because of the scale. And then there's some more autumnal ones, so I'm adding more orange again. Just keep altering the mix. And they are in shadow at the front. So I'm just gonna add some dark. And there's a few trees that are sneaking up through them. Make it a bit brighter by adding some yellow. just got to think of the way the light's coming and the effect it's having on the trees. And then again, there's a very dark area in its own shadow up to the building. So I'll just run that through the yellow just to give it a lost and found edge. And then coming forward again, there's more green, so I'm just going to add Polridmouth into the mix, taking the edge off it by just mixing it with the other colours. Then it shows it's darker, but it's not an autumn colour around the chimney. Taking the paint back into the tree line. And then returning to the autumn colours again, so we're more orange. Just some neat orange at some stage, just to give it a bit of a punch. And then amongst that, there is one conifer that's showing out as very dark, so I'm going to use some Payne's grey and just do the strokes up and out like a Christmas tree. And there's another one next to it, so I'll do exactly the same, but it's further away, so I'm just going to make it a tiny bit darker. More Payne's grey. More Payne's grey at the bottom of that one. And then just work other colours up to it. If it bleeds, it doesn't matter. It just shows where the trees are. And now dry brush and just make a better point. And a few more branches just to balance it. And then coming down to the house again, it's very dark, so as I've got Payne's grey on the brush, I can just make that fraction darker. Just take the brush for a walk. Then there's a darker driveway. There's sort of a little tunnel through the trees for the drive, which I thought was quite interesting. It's all these things that make you decide to paint a picture because it looks interesting. And then going out to the autumn colours from that, so it's sort of like a big arch. And that makes the house show up nicely now. And these trees and shrubs go all the way out to the seawall. Trees and shrubs clinging to the cliff top are casting shadows into the field. So I've got the Payne's grey again. I'm just going to put a couple of streaks just to show that they're casting shadows. And same for some up here. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I can put more shrubs in front of the lake. So I need a bigger brush, and I've got lots of colours on the palette, so it's an opportunity to use them. I'm just going to add some yellow ochre to them and some orange. And they go all around, just where some of the long grass has dried off. And then there's some areas that are difficult to define, so I'm going to use a smaller brush and some darker paint again, just cleaning off my palette. Anything that's on the palette is being used. And there's shrubs growing up from the field that are going over the lake, and it's more in shade this side. Just taking the brush for a walk. It doesn't have to be anything too definite. It all helps to make the lake look nice and blue and clear. And they're not solid, you can see the water through the branches. And when I've finished, I'll drop another colour in just to make it more 3D, but I'm starting this way, and these two actually almost meet up. And there's reflection of some taller trees, must be the cedars, all the way to the lake. So I'll put in the branches and then the foliage. The more you look, the more you see sometimes. Now I'm just going to drop in a little bit of a warmer green. So I'll use a sap green and some yellow. Just drop it in here, just to make it a bit more three-dimensional. Then the last reflection on the lake is the trees here that are showing through. And because they're in shade one side, they're looking quite dark. Even though looking out across the lake, they look quite light. It's the other side that's reflecting. And then there's some water lilies there. Obviously at this time of year, it's only the pads, not the lilies. And then just gently merge it all together. More dark round to where it meets the house. Then the water lilies themselves are a different green, so I'm just going to use the sap green and a little bit of yellow and just make sideways strokes so that you can see it's something different. Now while I'm here, I can make some of the reflections by the house a little bit more 3D by adding a different colour. You just have to keep adjusting the tones as you go. I will go to the day marker, which is grey one side because it's in shadow. So I'll let the shadow dry, and I've got some more trees I can put in against the sea. I'm just going to stick in some trunks. They're very much in shade, so you can't really see too much detail. I'll put some detail on in a minute, but I'm just going to claim the space. Changing to a smaller brush. Adding some brown to the trunks, a few nooks and crannies. And then just adding a few more branches. And there's a bit of a field line underneath them. And they're quite dark in places, so I'll just add some Payne's grey this side. Now coming back to the house, there's shadows on the roof which help show the dormers, but you can't really see the windows because they're catching the sunlight, so it's just a question of a tiny mark. So just putting in a dark triangle either side, just to show the roof, and making the end of the roof slightly darker. And the same for the building that's behind. It's got a door that I can put in a minute. I could probably put the red in for the day marker now. I'm just using Scarlet Lake, but any red will do. And I'm going to tint it with some Azilian Crimson just to make it slightly darker. I've just added a few dark strokes for windows. I hope you'll enjoy the Gribben yourself quite soon, and thank you very much for watching.